And I appreciate all this commentary because I walked away after the last few meetings feeling like we keep staring at undefined problems from different directions, and we have kind of a looming deadline to do something. First of all, ideally do no harm. So, just in background, as a county commissioner of the county of about 26,000 folks, we're de-bruised, we're way on our 2.5% limit. We haven't increased mills. In the past, about 10 years ago, there was one asked to increase mills that was denied by the voters. However, 93% of our tax base is residential. So we're de-bruised and waived. Gallagher continued over the years to keep held us in check in terms of revenues coming in. When the Great Recession hit, it impacted us tremendously again. We're primarily residential. We did not return to our 2010 revenues until 2018. We didn't catch up with inflation until 2021. This is really the first year we had no brakes on revenue. We actually had to sit down and decide what was important to fund, and then we chose to do a temporary mill level reduction under 108 to keep our revenues essentially to match what we felt our expenses should be, and to be fair to our constituents. So what I had sent forward, I'm not sure if you have it on a document or anything, it's fine if you don't, was just looking at the collection of levers that we do have. The ones that exist, the ones that we understand, the ones that our taxpayers understand, the ones that we potentially actually understand the impacts of pulling on these levers. And kind of laid out about 6 things that I think working together, they're the kernel of a way of working forward. And obviously it's simple and blunt, and going back to background, retired Army colonel, kind of steeped in the 80% solution. Executed violently will get you where you need to go, and understand the policy's got to be a little more refined than that. But what I was proposing, what I was looking at is I lay asleep and then wake up and write down ideas. This collection of items, which was everybody understands TABOR and the limits of inflation and population growth. If we were to apply that to property tax collections specifically for those that are not, that de-bruised or not, do not collect more than that year to year, that would ideally lessen spikes somewhat. If you were de-bruised, then property taxes would be the first thing you would cut if you went over your or if you're not de-bruised, the property taxes would be the first thing you cut to get yourself under the cap. If you waived your 5.5%, I think the idea that was proposed of the truth in taxation, if you want to go over that 5.5%, at least do that publicly. That would dampen some of this. That would certainly dampen a spike like we were seeing most recently. Certainly allow local voters to raise the caps, but when we raise the cap, that we put a sunset, so that has to come back to the voters periodically. If you're doing it for bonded indebtedness, it's got to continue more than like you said. I put some time hacks and some things on here that I'm not wedded to. I just want to put something on paper. And so if we raise a revenue cap, we raise it for only 10 years, unless it's for something that bonded indebtedness where you're bonding for 20 or 30 years, you've got to be able to have that. Lock our current residential assessment rate, but require and use the downward mill adjustments to satisfy the caps that were there in 1 and 2. The 5th was to reduce the assessment rates for non-res other than oil and gas. I threw up 1% annually, but by some amount, so there's some predictability to get down to some sort of parity. I put 2 to 1, that might be crazy, but just to have something to get to. And then continue those non-residential reduction rates until we get them equalized, and then eliminate the proliferation of classes that we have. If not on here, if the state wants to make some adjustments that interfere with our revenue, it's got to be backfilled. And then I understand all of this has tremendous impacts on potentially school funding, and that would have to be looked at. I wanted to be quick and just lay out everything. And I know, again, this is very much from my point of view and from talking with my peers and also citizens, something that works for both and may not work everywhere. If we, I'm kind of back to Commissioner Terry's comments, if we don't do something, and this may not be the something, but we've got to have something, a set of solutions that work together to get us to something before. If we only want to focus on what do we have to do this year to prepare for things that expire at the end of this year for 25 and keep working, that's fine. But we can't just keep meeting and talking about pieces of the elephant without bringing everything together. So it's my plea. This is I'm open to any comment, and I'm not defensive.
Thank you, Commissioner Richardson, for putting this together. So questions for, or comments for Commissioner Richardson off the top. So Commissioner Roth.
Commissioner Richardson, are you considering the treatment of ag properties when you're doing this?
Yeah, actually, I changed that.
Okay.
Part of it, yeah.
Because
ag needs to stay as a class, or at least to be able to define production versus market value.
And then second question, if I could, thank you. It would be on the 5.5% limit. If people are out from under the 5.5% limit, that was an election of their voters. So to reinstate that, I think you would need to do a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, and I more thinking after I had sent this to Trace, but if that had already been waived by the voters, then I think the concept of the truth in taxation, that if you were going to go above that, even though waived, that there'd be a mechanism where you have to do so publicly, notice it, talk about it. We do so for setting budgets anyway, but I think thinking about a very specific notation. We're going to go over 5.5% this year because it's important.
Thank you. Other questions, other comments? Commissioner Pogue.
I will just say, as someone who represents the rural resort communities, I think number one would be particularly problematic. As an example, in Summit County, our year-round population is actually very similar to yours. It's 31,000, but on any given night in Summit County, we have 75,000 people. So how do you account for the infrastructure that those additional 45,000 people that are in my community every night require? And I think I just raised that as an example because I think so many of these, it goes back to this issue of how different parts of our state really are, and how any kind of sweeping changes like this will disproportionately impact some communities and not others. We don't have oil and gas in our community, so again,
what we get some.
Yes, I've heard that, and actually my friends in Teller County also tell me a gold mine would be helpful. I just, when we think about some of these sweeping changes that would sort of declassify certain things and classify other things, it will disproportionately impact some communities and not others.
I'm curious, when did you debruce?
Oh goodness, I think we debruced early on in the process. And interestingly, when we have gone back to our local voters, we have done a 10-year sunset of all of ours. So that, I don't particularly mind.
Well, the other part I would say is, I know it's difficult, and I know it seems hopeless when you go to the voters and say you want more money, but I think the onus is on us as local governments to prove that we're using their money well and that they can trust us. And when we say we need more, that maybe we get that support. And I get that, absolutely.
Other questions for Commissioner Richardson, other comments?
Well done.
So we'll keep this on the hopper for consideration. It kind of crosses several of the other issues that have been raised. For example, the commercial, non-residential, residential rates as an example, and somehow to put guardrails or a brake on total growth, as well as some room for growth. All right, yes,
If I may, being the
Yes.
city and county mayor, we know that residential property taxes do not cover the cost of county services. So we rely heavily, because of the taxing scheme that we've inherited, on residential revenue to cover the cost of services that our community expects. So while I agree with getting to parity, if you ratchet them both down, we'll be cutting services, right? I mean, it's simple to say, but that looks like closing your recreation centers one day a week. That looks like not planting flowers, not watering your parks. That looks like a whole lot of things.
Again, this was meant to be a big step to one side or the other, but I can tell you, I've heard forever that residential doesn't pay the way, but I live in a county that's 93% residential. If we make it work. Granted, we don't have the infrastructure requirements because we're largely rural and people have their own wells. We plow dirt roads and we don't maintain sidewalks, and I know there's a lot more to it than this.
so thank you for that again, Commissioner Richardson, and Commission for engaging those discussions. We'll keep that all in parts of this for future deliberation. There were a couple other things I wanted to bring up that came up after the 19th. So one was from Senator Basley, who unfortunately isn't here now, but you might recall he had an idea at the January 19th meeting and wrote it down. And his idea is replace the current property taxation formula with one that assesses shares of responsibility for a predetermined total budget rather than a multiple of assessed value. So that's what he provided. I wish you were here. Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to read that again. Replace the current property taxation formula with one that assesses shares of responsibility for a predetermined total tax budget rather than a multiple of assessed value. So if I recall, his comments were, let's look at, instead of seeing how much money is available and how we can spend it, why don't we reverse that and set a budget and see what funds that was, I think, his perspective. And I certainly would like to give him a chance to talk about this at a future meeting, but I wanted to put it in front of the group in our discussion today. So thoughts about that? Commissioner Kirk.
Thanks. I don't understand how that would work in Colorado, because if we set a budget, and so let me clarify, and of course, him not being here makes it hard to clarify, but so in Jefferson County, would that mean the county, this Jefferson County School District, and all of our special districts all combined together to figure anything that's funded through property taxes, we come up with one combined budget, and then we say this is our combined budget, and so this is the amount of money we need? Is that how you're reading it?
Again, I think the idea is that this came up in the context of affecting property taxes to adjust through the rate, the assessment rate, and also the amount of revenue that could be